Welcome to the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership, the podcast that cuts through the noise to deliver real-world leadership wisdom from the front lines of business. I'm your host, Billy Duren, CEO, curious learner, and passionate student of people and performance. Whether you're leading a team of 10 or 10,000, this show is your go-to resource for creative insights that drive results and build people. Whether you're already in the CEO chair or you're just beginning your journey, this is a theory, it's the nuts and bolts. Let's go to work. All right, everyone, welcome into the meeting room. Today, we're going to be talking about leadership because this is the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast. I'm the host, Billy Duren, and today we've got a special edition of the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast. For the last couple of years, we've done sort of a Thanksgiving episode, and I know we're coming around the season, the holidays, and we're all looking forward to. Sometimes I think Thanksgiving doesn't get the credit it deserves, but today we're going to make a special effort to bring attention to Thanksgiving and what it looks like to be thankful, what it looks like to lead from a grateful heart. More about the posture than an event. We want to think about Thanksgiving not as an event, but something that we live and we walk in daily. So today our special guest is Dr. Endel Lee, Marine Corps veteran and Navy chaplain, and I'm going to give you some more information on his bio before we get started. Dr. Endel Lee, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Billy. It's good to be here with you today.
Well, I'm just telling you, when I was reading over your bio, we've gotten to know each other a little bit over the last few weeks and a month or so, but reading your bio, I felt like I really needed to sit up straight. Dr. Lee is a distinguished Marine Corps veteran, retired Navy chaplain, whose life and leadership has been shaped by service on both the battlefield and the spiritual front lines. With more than 3 decades of combined military experience, Dr. Lee has served Marines and sailors in some of the most demanding environments, including multiple deployments to Iraq, where he provided critical spiritual counsel, emotional resilience, and pastoral care amid the realities of combat. So, Dr. Lee, I was kind of getting started with this today when I was reading it. How do you distinguish rank and distinction in Rear Admiral and Dr. Lee? How do we go with this?
Yeah, for me, I settled in on Endel. That's the name that was given to me by birth, and that's what I'm most comfortable with. I also, being a spiritual leader, draw affinity to that idea of being Brother Endel. Amongst congregations and places like that, it's the term of endearment that I favor most. So the other things represent where I've been and what I've done, but Brother Endel represents who I am.
Very good. It's interesting when I'm reading on through the bio, and we talked about where firsthand where you learned about discipline, courage, brotherhood that define the Corps. Then it goes right down to the next paragraph when it talks about theology and leadership and servant leadership and faith under fire. You really bring a unique blend, and this is pointed out in the bio here, of courage, compassion, and convictions. I know that I've heard you talk about the 5 C's. There's 3 more: courage, compassion, and conviction. And your life has been a testament to that. And I'm grateful for you to be here to share some of that with us today on the podcast.
Well, I look forward to offering what I can, Billy.
So when we look back and we created the podcast, it was about talking about what leadership looks like, not conceptually, but actually what it looks like. And you've served both as a warrior and then later as a chaplain on the battlefield, serving the hearts of the warriors. So how have those 2 roles, just kind of get this thing kicked off, shaped your understanding of what authentic leadership looks like?
Yeah, well, I was pressed into leadership early on. I joined the Marine Corps within my first semester of college, and that was a defining moment for me from the moment my feet hit the yellow footprints at Parris Island, as we all shared that experience as Marines, that I began to understand what responsibility would look like as I began to steer others in accomplishing things together. And over that course of time, I took on and learned some of the principles and guidelines. And it's been said that one of the first responsibilities of a leader is to define reality. And that sense of becoming a warrior and understanding what that meant in my life, there were some very real things that came into focus quickly through that realization. And we have a saying among those who have served in combat that combat has a way of clarifying life pretty quick. Those things that are really important begin to come to the forefront and stick. And some of those things that we think are really important some days, they begin to fade to the background and realize they're a part of just the spinning wheel. And I think helping people see that as a leader, especially in those crisis moments, and to move forward with those awarenesses and what we would call the core values that support decisions in that setting, realizing there's a lot of risk and sometimes even loss of life that can come with that, has been one of those shaping moments for me. And I think then in the chaplain role, shifting, they're not incredibly different, but it's a matter of emphasis as you come to that. In the warrior role, sometimes you have to kill people and telling other people to kill people. That can be traumatic. From my faith orientation, we weren't created to do that as described in Genesis, but it's a consequence of sin in the reality of life today. But as we press through that reality now, that current place where we're living in the midst of a fallen world, that comes to bear itself out. And as a chaplain, what I do is I help people put those pieces together in this correlation between what I often refer to as the boom and the box. We have a box which we see life through. People call that a worldview. And there are booms that happen outside of that box, and we have to assimilate them in some way into our life so they make sense. If we don't do that, that box, that worldview will collapse on us. And as the chaplain, I have the privilege to come along some of our heroes and walk beside them in the midst of that rip and pull and tension and tear, and to help them sort through that, hopefully in careful ways, so they can continue to function well. I have one guy say it to me this way, another warrior. He said, "Chaplain, my job is to kill people. Your job is to make sure I don't like it too much." And I thought that was a great distillation for me of how to keep these things in check in this tension that we live in, the bottom line. And if you can take those principles and fan them out into other leadership settings, they really apply well on a broad horizon.
Yeah, I'm already kind of making notes here. Boom in the box. I'm gonna need to chew on that for a minute, but I appreciate the way you settled it, because I could hear in your voice there seems like you've settled and come to the resolve of the idea of the warrior having to kill. But it sounded like also there may have been a time for you or for others as you were counseling that there was a wrestling that went on with that idea. It sounds like you've settled it, but tell us a little bit about the wrestle when it was going on.
Yeah, and what I'll say is to use that box, and I want to give a little bit of credit to a guy by the name of Joe Bonvy. He's a clinical psychologist in the Navy. We served together in some far-off places that I don't get to talk about a lot. And we were having these kind of conversations, working out how do we come in stereo along these guys who are some of our most phenomenal heroes in military service. I like to call them my special friends. And how do we help them sort through this in a way that is simplified but not oversimplified? So to go back to that boom in the box, when the boom happens, to use a real easy computer analogy, we have to kind of click on that boom and try to drag it into our life and our understanding of the world and how it operates and our own experiences. And sometimes, you've experienced this, Billy, when you click on something to try to drag it, it doesn't move. It won't slide into your box for some reason. The next option is then to click on the box and move the box and try to pull it over the top of the boom and assimilate it that way. But when we do that, sometimes we can unleash ourselves from the anchors of life, or those values that we hold dear and that are so important, things like honor, courage, and commitment. If we let all the experiences in our life rattle and shake us to where the box is bouncing over all the booms all the time, it can be very unsettling. And I think that's one of the reasons why some of our folks struggle, and our numbers of suicides among our military people and even our general population are higher, because they don't have those concrete anchor points settled in as much anymore. So instead of just, when you can, click on the boom and drag it into your box, and if it assimilates well, you're good. But if that doesn't work, then your next move is to try to click on the box and move it over. And again, there's some danger in that, and it may not work it may work for a few minutes, but it may not work for the long term. The best option is to click on the edge of the box and drag the boundaries of the box wider, so you experience what we like to call transformational growth in light of those experiences, and you're able to draw the box or the boom into your box with that expansion, which takes usually input from a community And again, I'm a believer that faith is a key part of that as well. That's one of those grounding anchor points that we have to put into one of those corners that allows the box to have a reference point that is meaningful for life.
So really, that's part of what I wanted to get to today in this idea of how can we find gratitude in all that stuff. And when I mean stuff, I mean you've seen things you can't unsee anymore. The Warriors have seen things, but quite frankly, there are people that we associate with every day just in their homes that have seen things they can't unsee anymore. So that boom might not be on the battlefield. It might have been a troubling episode and just in life in general. So when it comes to that, when you were counseling with and speaking with and really ministering to hearts over there, when gratitude didn't seem to be the natural thing, how did you bring people into that idea of where do I find things in that?
Yeah, you're exactly right, Billy, as far as just thinking about that spray of crises and impacts in humanity. It can come through financial struggles, a loss of a child, sickness, health. There's just all kind of ways where these booms come into our lives. And what I've found in principle that is really significant in responding to 2 or 3 solutions. One is to learn to count your blessings. Even in the midst of the adversity and all the trouble that's spinning, we often use the cliche of a silver lining. There's usually something in there that can be brought out that's positive if you're willing to look at those edges. And there is a whole hymn that prompts us to do this. It's count your many blessings, literally name them one by one. And that's the starting place, just to reset so you're not focused on that dark aspect or the dynamics of the consequences that are spinning out of your control. You may not can even influence all of that, but you can influence your posture about how you begin to engage it, and then look for those learning points, those blessings that may exist in that are stable in the midst of all that churn. Another thing that I talk about is reframing the picture sometimes. Sometimes we have to learn to look at it a different way. So, and I know we're in voice mode here, but so the way I try to describe this, folks, is, hey, take your fingertips and put them together and spread your elbows. And you get something that will look kind of like a mountain, you know. And if you can get a couple of people, if you and I were to join our elbows right now together side by side, you would have a perspective of what most people would look like 2 mountaintops. And I ask people, so where are the mountaintops? And many times they'll point to their fingertips. And I say, well, let's look at that from a different angle now. Let's look at it not from our perspective, but from the God perspective. Let's look from the top down, and where do the mountaintops appear? And they're actually where the elbows touch in the valley. And sometimes we can learn that and depict that God may be doing something extraordinary even in those valleys and challenges. We can begin to endure it and be grateful for it in a better way. Oswald Chambers said it this way. He said, God gives us the mountaintops from our perspective to encourage us and to help us to keep going, but he really does our greatest work with us in the valleys. And we want to remember to give him thanks for that. And that kind of leads me to the third thing, which is we can trust God that he'll take those tests and those churns and turn them into a testimony.
Well, I'll tell you, I can tell when good information's coming in the podcast when I've gotten lost in listening to where because I'll lose my place now, and as we going through this, but so just to kind of point out a little leadership nugget here for you, in that you're a great storyteller. I mean, I've told you I love the way you make analogies and storytelling when you can paint pictures for people by the example you just gave, and the mountain, and then what it looks like to have a mountain range if you had several people. So I got to the picture very quickly. So how did you develop the storytelling? I know you do it from the pulpit. I'm sure you did it when you were counseling. I'm sure you did it when you were on the battlefield. How has the storytelling kind of evolved as part of your communication techniques?
Well, in preaching, what I learned, there are 3 fundamental elements to preaching. One is explanation. The second element is illustration, and the third is application. That's really all that preaching is, and good communication generally. They may not always go in that sequence of order. So I've tried over the years to, explain things well, but then you bring them into real life when people can see the picture or hear the story. And to take that to ground related to your question about, Thanksgiving, and how do we anchor those points? Even for me, I've learned to practice that, counting my blessings. And one of those stories that emerges out of our life, 2 weeks after I got back from Iraq in 2005, a lady named Katrina came to visit New Orleans, where we lived at the time. I was teaching at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. Just returned from that deployment, and we were in the midst of getting ready for a new semester. And lo and behold, our world got spun around and turned upside down. We had about hip-deep water in our home, lost pretty much everything except what was in our children's rooms on the second floor and the stuff in our attic, that everybody prizes greatly. And we had to start over. But I'll never forget, we stayed as a part of the response. Again, I had served with the Coast Guard and a number of those folks in District 8 at the time that I had affinity and relationship with prior to my deployment to Iraq. And so I told my wife, I said, hey, I'm a first responder. I need to be here to help and support these guys. Of course, growing up in the South, we'd been through hurricanes before. I'd actually served with the Coast Guard in the aftermath of 9/11 in New York City and some other places. So I was like, I'm not going to leave these guys here because I know they will need some additional support from that spiritual arena, and anticipating that. Of course, it was much higher than any of us realized, and what we had to do after about 4 or 5 days, I actually had to gather my family because my wife said, if you're staying, I'm staying. We'd been separated for a lengthy period of time, and that's the way she shares her testimony, and we'd done hurricanes before, just nothing like that. But I'll never forget, after all of that churn over those 3 or 4 days and what we saw in the aftermath of Katrina, where we were in our vantage points, we drove out with a group and was able to come around through downtown the convention center and cross over the bridge, and that's a whole story in itself. But I'll never forget when we finally got into cell signal range, I called my dad because they hadn't heard from us. And all they could see was the news and the chaos that was being promoted there. And they weren't sure how we were. But I remember him answering the phone, and I said, Dad, we're okay. And I said, I got the most important things in the vehicle with me. My wife and the kids are here. My mom is in the back with us. And I said, we're going to be all right. I said, I just want you to know that. I'll talk to you again soon. And that was one of those moments where though I'd lost everything and I knew it, my whole world had changed. Eventually there would be new jobs. We would move to a new place. Vehicles, all of that, just gone literally in a short period of time. But I was able to realize in that moment that God has spared us and that I had the most important things. And that's, I think, what helps us make the transitions in that Thanksgiving moment. And what was amazing is my kids sit in the back seat. It's hard to speak it again almost because it was such an emotional moment of relief and realization that my kids heard that conversation with my dad, and they still talk about it today. And it splashed into that generation without me even trying or planning. And it was a turning point in our lives. And my son still talks about it today. He said, we've lost everything, but we got everything we need.
Well, and right back to the article that you wrote, and I appreciate your vulnerability and your genuineness and how you express that, because the article you wrote about thanking in the thick of it, we really don't know what that Thanksgiving posture can mean in the way of testimony and who's watching. We often look at leaders, we also look at those who are in charge in the middle of crisis to go, are we going to be okay? They look to the leader. And your children and your wife being there to see that we're going to be okay because we've got the most essential, necessary things that we're going to be okay.
It's funny you mentioned that, Billy, because we were with a group. There was about 15 or 16 of us there that were on the campus at that point. And I was not the designated leader. We had some other guys in charge, but I was a part of the faculty I was supporting, and I actually had surrendered to their leadership and the calls that they were making because they were part of the security element, those kinds of things. But as I contributed and cooperated, it was amazing. And I didn't know this at the time, but later those guys told me, they said, we were in deep water, and we were pretty nervous at times, and sometimes we didn't have an awareness about what was going to happen or what we needed to do, but we could look at you and we could see a calmness in your spirit that was there, and we felt like we were going to be all right. My boys have said similar things. We had to pull some of our stuff out of the house. That's what we took. I told them, go upstairs, get a backpack, and put whatever you want to take with you, but all you get's a backpack and a small suitcase. And we put them in a canoe and walk that canoe up to the campus to vehicles we could get in and drive out. And my boys will say the same thing, and maybe they thought, because I'm a former Marine and they've seen all these other things that I do, jumping out of airplanes, scuba diving, all that cool stuff that we talk about. But it was really more of, I think, the spiritual grounding, that peace that passes under all, understanding in the midst of it, that was helping me hold it together as they looked on. And we just did the next right thing.
Yep. I love the idea that leaders don't need permission to lead. They just step into it. And we've talked about this often. If you throw 10 people into a situation, somebody's going to rise. Somebody's going to step up and lead. And I love for our leaders that are hearing this, our developed leaders, our emerging leaders, the people that are just kind of finding their way into their own leadership roles, and how that may look like in doing, as you said, the next right thing. My wife's favorite saying, do the next right thing. We were with our grandsons this weekend, and that teaching and coaching going on with them, do the next right thing. And, you wrote this article called Thinking in the Thick of It, and I couldn't help but I read through that whole article. You could lay the same story over the Katrina story you just told, in the thick of it, in the thick of what was going on around you, that you kind of had, that there wasn't any control over it. But I'm going to be in a posture of thanksgiving, so I'm going to find thanks in that. I love the line in here that you talk. It's actually kind of funny that you said it was interesting when you were deployed, that the attendance on church on Sunday morning was greatly affected by if there were rockets in the camp on Saturday night. I got a chuckle out of that. But I'm imagining, though, again, back to the story, how you can use those analogies to make a greater point. If we are considering ourselves believers and our faith is that God has that oversight protection over us, whether there's rockets in the camp or not, we live in that posture of thankfulness and that faith that God is going to carry us through these things. So I love how you have told the story. I love your genuineness. And this is, I believe, what makes you such a great leader. You're authentic, you're vulnerable, and the people around you see that. This is the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast. We're with Dr. Endel Lee, and we'll be right back.
Threaded Fasteners is a 100% employee-owned company with a mission to create value in and for the people we serve. If you're interested in learning more about our people-centric culture or need a customized fastener solution, send us an email at culture@threadedfasteners.com. That's culture@threadedfasteners.com.
All right, everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Dr. Lee, Endel, we're going to kind of pivot a little bit. I love this conversation around what the heart of gratitude looks like, particularly when it comes to leadership. So when it comes to making decisions, handling people, facing conflict, we talked about that. How does that posture of gratefulness help you in your decision-making as a leader?
Well, as you ask that question, what pops into my mind is a desk in Djibouti, Africa. Kind of teasing out another one of those story opportunities out of my experience. I'd been there for a few months, and I had an awkward situation that emerged where I literally had to fire a member of my team, and it created some great strains on us. And we had a temporary gap. I had to reach back and say, I need another resource to fill this gap that we've got now. And we began to work through that. I'd made some adjustments in the interim to set up, and one of those adjustments for workflow purposes was the orientations of some desks in our office. And I was just trying to make a simple alignment that I thought would smooth some of that out as we reset with the new member of the team. But she got there and she didn't like the way the desk was oriented. Had to actually, I discovered later, deal with some trust issues that she had experienced with other people, not with me yet. And so when she got there, she changed the desk back to a different orientation, and without asking or telling me. And of course, the other team members knew the significance of what I was doing, but she didn't. And so I walked back in the office from lunch, and I immediately saw the change. And I made eye contact with a couple of folks, and then I had the decision to make at that point. First of all, that gratitude, I was very grateful that she was there. And I knew she was going to make a tremendous impact on our team. And my reaction at this point was going to set the tone for our way forward. So after making eye contact, I said, hey, I'm going for a walk, and I'll be back in a little while. And they all knew what was happening, and I did. I exited the room as a leader, went for about a 20 or 30-minute walk, found something productive to do that was on my list of things to do, but I hadn't been able to get to it yet. I actually walked down to the CB hut and looked for a pole for our Memorial Day flag that we were going to do just in a couple of weeks. And I got kind of that piece lined out, created a positive interaction, let my emotions kind of calm down, because the initial instinct was to react out of my flesh and say, put that back. But I didn't want that desk to become a blocking point in our relationship or to cripple her again in regard to that sense of trust. So I was gone probably a couple of hours working on this other project, and I got back, and I walked back in the room, and I was hoping while I was gone that the explanation would happen and the rest of the team might be able to influence her. But she was the senior ranking person in the room at that point among them as the enlisted side. And I got back in the room, and it was the same. So I just walked past it, went back and sat at my desk, and started working and doing some things. And again, I wanted her to understand that I wasn't going to just use my position or my rank at that point to get my way, and wanted to let it breathe a little longer. And I just let it stay. This was not something that was a hill to die on. And again, it was more important for her to see my gratitude, that I was grateful she was there, and the skill sets that she brought to the team. And I didn't want that to break right here out of the gate. It took about a month, Billy. And she finally came back to me, and she said, I didn't understand at the time. Now I see, I've been here long enough and understand what you were trying to do, just with that simple shifting in the desk and the ability to free up some communication abilities and other things. And she said, I want to apologize to you because I know that it looked like I disrespected you, but I had some inner things going on. And then she opened up about that and began to share with me, and became transparent about her own struggles, even as a senior leader in the enlisted ranks. And she was trying to cover down and block. And I said, thank you for sharing that with me. I can work with that. And we began to move forward to the point we had another episode down the road that was very meaningful, and it involved a water buffalo in Africa. And it became a phenomenal story between us, as I share, and I won't elaborate on that at this point, but the one word that came out of that was buffalo. And a lot of times we could find ourselves in crises or struggles down the road, and we could just look at each other and one of us would say buffalo. And we realized that we were at one of those cross points, not necessarily between us, but maybe in interacting with somebody else that would help us team up and move forward. And I would say today I'm forever grateful, number one, that I didn't overreact in that moment, that I gave her some room to learn and figure out how to lead in that configuration. And we're still the best of friends today through that experience.
So when you look back on that now and thinking about it, and I'm thinking about, because it could have went the other way. It could have been that she'd never come to compliance or an understanding of that. The compliance wasn't the right word, but a come to an understanding of it. But what were the risks then if the others were watching this and she never did see it? There's some risk there, right? Though, I mean, isn't part of being a leader taking those risks? Like you could have walked in there and just demanded it. I'm assuming you were the ranking officer. You could have just fixed it. And oftentimes we find ourselves, particularly in leadership, supervisor type roles in the workplace, we can just say, fix it. And it fixes it. But as you pointed out, what is that doing to damage the relationship going forward? And what would be a better way to do that? What were the risks there? Yeah. With the rest of the team looking at it?
You're exactly right. And fortunately, I had enough rapport with them. They had watched me and interact, and some of them had gone through those same growing as we built our team and learned together. And
they've seen your techniques before.
They saw, they had experienced them personally. Just, in a short time, I'd been there probably 4 months by that time, and we had built out some trust that was there, and realized anytime you inject a new person into a group or a team like that, you go through a process that we learned through basic psychology courses. There's this idea of the forming, storming, norming, performing, and then eventually a reforming idea. We were in the midst of a reforming moment with that new member injected into the group. And again, I had to make a risk assessment to say, is this a hill worth dying on, or do I want to show my value of her and my respect for her? And that's actually what they read out of it, was not that I was going to get my way absolutely in determinations to show who was really in charge. It was an aspect of accepting her for who she was at that moment, realizing we had some growth edges, but make some determinations of how to walk through that and formulate. And for me in leadership, I've seen it over the years where I have developed a shift in what I would call is more that authoritarian posture to more of an influencer piece in this teamwork construct. And in that influencing, still be able to make the hard call when you need to make it, not be afraid to do that, but when it's not necessary to break things, to give people the opportunity to go through that growth like we talked about a little bit earlier, and give them room to move the lines on their box and do that together as a group.
It's, John Maxwell, I know that you're a fan of John Maxwell. John Maxwell wrote that leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. And quite frankly, when it comes to the authoritarian model, I think that there are leaders that have seen the failure of the authoritarian model and now are shifting more to the influencing. The word influencer now has a whole different meaning than it did, 20 years ago because of the internet and the things that are going on and all of that, the race to be the top influencer. But quite frankly, when we are fulfilling our roles as leaders, we are influencing the people around us. And what that looks like in terms of a grateful posture is the gratitude it comes from being able to have the privilege to be an influencer in someone's life. What a privilege it is as we walk in that. So you talked a little bit about, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, let me inject there something that I think is a key point related to what we're talking about. You mentioned John Maxwell, and you're right. I love his fundamental definition of leadership, which is being able to see and follow a clear path and then compel others to do it together. And for me, or to move along that journey together. And I like to add, by my faith orientation, all to the glory of God. That's a Colossians 3 reference to me that is critical to validate that. But that key word in that definition is compelling others and looking at what methodologies you choose to compel others. And for me, that difference between the authoritarian aspect and the influencer aspect for me is I want people to follow me. I don't want them to have to follow me. And that's all the difference in the approach. And if I can use that want to variable most of the time, then the have to part is more selective. And as we try to build that connection between mission and people, some leaders will put an emphasis on mission and the people will suffer. And other orientations, they'll put the emphasis on people and the mission will suffer. And what I've found is the greatest leaders, they put the right emphasis on both and they wind up bearing the suffering. And that's ultimately manifested for me in the picture of Jesus Christ when he died upon the cross and gave himself for the sins of the world so that we could all have that eternal posture. I'll try not to preach too much, but I wanted to get that in.
No, I love that because it all comes back to if we are anchored in that heart of gratitude from our faith, from who we are in Christ, it is going to come out. And how that comparison as to what that looks like in the real world, how we eventually tie this into the story of salvation, I think is an incredible giftedness that we have, an opportunity we have to do that. I was going to ask you about how you transitioned from being the authority in Minnie's life to being the counselor as a chaplain, so from authority to empathy, but it sounded like you were making that transition throughout your whole career. It wasn't that you took off the warrior hat and put on the chaplain hat. It sounds like it was a transformation going on over the life of your journey.
That's exactly right, Billy. It was not a role-related shift for me, and I don't think that those two things are exclusive. In fact, with the idea of the empathy and compassion, you can be a great leader, and some of the greatest leaders I've experienced in my own journey and walking alongside people have been able to be very firm in what needed to happen, but also show the compassion to people as they move through that. And I came to faith when I was 15. Called to ministry at about 17. So much of, and I think God put me in the military. A lot of people, as they hear my testimony, they ask that question. But I woke up one morning and I was very convicted and convinced that the Lord wanted me to go that morning and join the Marine Corps. And so I got up and went and did that out of obedience. And it fit into my life picture. But it was in all of those connecting to those dots over the course of my life that God helped draw out those things as I watched other leaders and then tried it myself and sometimes failed, sometimes succeeded, and began to put those patterns together. That correlation built up to the point that even as a chaplain, many times as I came alongside senior leaders, that was one of the things I think God did for me. And a lot of that stuff you talked about with the chest candy and all that on the uniform and the rank structure and stuff was me having been in the enlisted ranks, having served as a junior officer in the Marine Corps as a platoon commander, and then actually moving up to a commanding officer in that role, then shifting to chaplain after I got all my education done. God was maturing that development in me all the way along so that when I could come alongside those senior leaders, and that was one of my major roles of the things that I do. I care for people in ministry. I facilitate. I lead in worship settings. But another very key factor that we do is to advise the commanding officer on these kinds of endeavors, morale and spiritual things. And that earned a credibility for me that I in no way could have seen God was building out over time.
Well, when we look at this, we talked about techniques. We talked about, you taking a walk, the moment that you kind of could sense that you didn't like the situation. You took a walk and had a moment to calm down. You just explained that all of the experience that you had up to the point. I love that phrase. I got distracted by chest candy. That's pretty funny. When you were talking about all the experiences through the ranks helped you lead from the position that you led in, I'm thinking about leaders that are listening to this podcast and some, that started at the low rank, so to speak, in the business world. They started out in the warehouse and then they moved into these other things. But every piece of our journey helps contribute to who we are in our leadership role, whether at home or at work, all the parts. So it comes back again to, can we be grateful along the way for the little wins, even for the little difficulties? When we're going through trouble, it's hard to go, Lord, just thank you for all this trouble. But the posture that we can stay in, though, if we can hear the words from Paul when he wrote, give thanks in all things, not necessarily for them, but give thanks in all things. There's something special being grown in us through even those difficult times.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's part of being a life learner as a leader. Somebody asked me not too long ago, if you had a superpower, what would it be? And I thought for a few seconds. And, of course, the stuff reels through all the Marvel movies and different distinctions and what that looks like. And, of course, I have a group of what I refer to as ordinary heroes that I hold up out of my life that have been incredible examples for me. And just within about 30 seconds of reflecting on that, with that kind of quiet pause, he could tell I wanted to give a very serious answer. I said, my superpower would be leadership, because leadership affects everything. If you learn how to get that right, model it well, even let people see you learning in the midst of modeling that, and continue to sharpen those edges and go forward through the seasons of your life, you can have an impact in ways that will multiply and ripple into next generations. Sometimes you won't see it all in this lifetime, but again, I think God endorses that ripple effect, and Scripture talks it will bless generation after generation after generation to come. And I saw that last night in my own experience. You and I were in a meeting last night together that was a pretty rigorous meeting, and we got some good decisions made for to benefit a group. And I was trying to utilize some of these things. Actually, if you recall, one time I had to step up to the microphone and apologize for something that I'd said that was it wasn't necessarily a negative thing, but it was something I wanted to catch and reset. And I actually wanted some other leaders in the room to watch me do that so they could realize, hey, I can be comfortable doing that. And I don't have to be right every time. I just have to be willing to acknowledge when I am wrong and then make the correction immediately or as soon as possible and move forward in that regard. But after that, we got all that settled and done, and I drove to the house and was thanking God on the drive to the house. Just, Lord, thank you for what you've done. My wife asked me for a debriefing of it. She was with grandchildren at home and wasn't able to listen herself. And I kind of talked through an executive summary of what was accomplished. And she said, that must feel pretty good to you. And I said, well, that's all glory to God. That's glory to God. And she said, yeah, but you had some impact on that, and you need to be willing to, acknowledge that. And trying to be humble, I appreciated what she said to me. But at the same time, that aspect of pushing it all back on the glory of God. And you know what the most important thing I did last night? After I got home, I got to rock two of my grandbabies to sleep. One a 1-year-old and the other a almost 5-year-old, sitting in my lap and talking to them and interacting with them and just showing them my love. And the gratitude that poured out of my heart beyond even what had happened in that meeting, that was, in my perspective, amazing and good to see. Yet then God added another blessing on top of that. And that was what I was concerned about, is they would be asleep before I got home. And they stayed up long enough for me to just offer that little bit of nurturing to them that'll be a seed in their life for years to come.
Well, we talk about leadership nuggets, and we like to pull little things that we can take away and walk away with from some of these conversations. And I appreciate how you have laid things out from us from an example standpoint. Perspective has been incredible. I will tell you that the leadership journey, the continuous learner, and how that we have opportunities to learn. Johnny told us this way back 60 episodes ago almost now. Stay the curious learner. Stay the curious learner. And that served us well as we've been doing these podcasts and as we have been looking for different people to come and be a part of it. So Endel, we kind of wind it up here and we look at, approach Thanksgiving. What's one of the things that you're most grateful for? You talked a little bit about that just now but then what would you say to encourage others as they learn to lead with a heart of gratitude in their own space or their own sphere of influence?
Yeah, I'll answer the second part of that first, Billy. And I think for me, as I look back over the course of my life and think about a skill set or what is the things that have benefited me most over that trajectory of learning as a leader and trying to do it day by day and get better at it for tomorrow, has been, first of all, learning to listen more and listen better. And then the second part of that is asking not just good questions, but learning how to ask great questions and letting those great questions sometimes help define the moment so people can engage and get clarity on what reality is together, where we started earlier on, and then bring that into focus so we can go forward together down that path to create the best solutions. As far as the things I'm most thankful for, you're right. I just alluded to that a little bit. And I think the top for the list has to be I'm most thankful for my salvation and the opportunities day to day that God gives me through his compassion and mercy to show or demonstrate his lordship in my life in the little ways along the path. And I don't ever want to take that for granted on any day because of the magnificent sacrifice that represents on God's behalf because of his love for me and his love for the whole world. The second part of that is time with my family. And as I've gotten older in this season of life, there's nothing I won't do to be able to spend time with my family. And I tell people my number one leadership responsibility now is to be GPA. That's what they call me at my house. And it's been amazing to watch how that identity shift has occurred. And in fact, I'm 62. So I could still be working. I got gas in the tank. And my wife was concerned. She said, "You're going to retire She said, the rocking chairs weren't made for you. She said, I don't know that you have that capacity to sit still long enough. And I said, well, my word is repurposed, not retired. God's just using me in a different way now, and I get paid different from what I'm different than the way I used to get paid. But I'm still, charging forward, and the opportunity I have to spend time with family, and particularly those 4 grandchildren from 8 down to 1, and to pour a little bit of love and leadership in their life every day, because I realize that's the most important thing I can do now before I die, is to shape their lives and help them understand who God is and who they are in His story.
Very good. Well, Endel, I will say this. I appreciate you being a part of this. Whether we were going to end with Rear Admiral Lee or where we're going to end with Dr. Lee, I appreciate your humility in saying that it's Endel Lee. And now I know even the most important rank and that you are considering is GPAW.
That's it, man.
That's good. So thank you for being on our podcast. We normally, Johnny, take a few minutes and recap, but I don't think there's anything else to say. So thank you for being on our podcast today.
God bless you, Billy.
Thank you, Endel, and God bless you. And until we meet again, tighten up.
Thank you for tuning in to the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast, brought to you by the proud employee owners of Threaded Fasteners. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe to, rate, and review the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Do you have a leadership story to tell or a question to ask? We'd love to hear from you. Email us at podcast@threadedfasteners.com. That's podcast@threadedfasteners.com. This show is made possible by our family at Threaded Fasteners, Inc., where our mission is to create value in and for the people we serve. Interested in learning more about TFI and how we create value in our team, in our community, and in our customers? Visit us at threadedfasteners.com. Thanks again for listening. This show is edited and produced by Johnny Glenn and our friends at Deep Fried Studios.